My name's Sarah Brigham. I'm the Artistic Director and Chief Executive here at Derby Theatre. And this is Laura, who's our interpreter, and also Laura, who'll be switching places with her. I've been asked to inform you that we are being live streamed through Facebook. So either wave to your mum now, or if you don't want someone to know, then please exit discreetly. Everyone happy with that? Yes, excellent. Hi, Mum. Okay, now, but why wouldn't you want to be here? This is our 6th annual Departure Lounge Festival. And it's the time of year when we, as a building, literally hand the keys over to the artists, and we give a platform to the very best in contemporary theatre and new work. We kicked off last night with some fantastic performances by Bennett and Holly Beasley-Garrigan. And today we've got more Edinburgh previews, scratch performances, stuff that's fresh from Latitude, one-to-one shows in the shed, all manner of things. So I hope that you'll stay with us for the rest of the day and evening and into tomorrow. Departure Lounge is, of course, spearled by In Good Company, and Ben is here. Ben is the creative producer. In Good Company is the flagship talent development programme for the East Midlands, and it's here to support you as artists throughout the year. So both Ben and Sophie are full-time, so please speak to them at some point today if you've got an idea that you want to talk about, etc. And although In Good Company is based at Derby Theatre, it is a partnership. These partners are who support In Good Company by giving space, commissioning monies, expertise, and venues where workshops and festivals like this one can happen. But more importantly, they engage with In Good Company on a debate about how do we make the East Midlands the most exciting place for artists to live and make work. So I'd just like to start out by saying hello and thank you to those partners. First of all, to our brilliant founding partner, Attenborough Arts Centre, who've helped us shape In Good Company over the last 6 years, but also now to Burton Brewhouse, Curve Leicester, Mansfield Old Library, Non-Such Studios, Nottingham Playhouse, Lincolnshire One Venues, Arena Wolverhampton, and New Diorama. Thank you to those partners. And thank you also to our funders. We're funded by Arts Council England and through the European Regional Development Fund. So, on to today and why you're here. Come in, just take a seat. So I became very aware that as somebody who's on a salary and in the luxury place that I am, that I get to go to all these conferences where my tickets are paid for, my accommodation's paid for, my travel's paid for, and I get to hear from these brilliant speakers and they shape my thinking about my practice and what I'm doing and what I should be doing and how I should be moving forwards. But quite often from those conferences, brilliant though they are, the independent voice is missing. Because we can't afford to take the time off, or we haven't got the money, the freelance check hasn't come through to pay for that ticket, etc. So that's the point of today, really. It's an opportunity to make the independent voice part of that national debate. So we make it free, we stream it so that as many people as possible can access it, and I hope that you find the next hour and a half stimulating. And who better to chair this panel than the very brilliant Gardner, who trailblazes the independent voice so very often. So I'm going to hand over to Lynn. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. It's really nice to see so many of you here. I'm really in favour of the idea of the keys of the building being handed over to artists. I think it's something that actually should go on a great deal more than it does. We've got an absolutely brilliant panel for you this afternoon, but this is not our session. It's your session, and it's also the session of everybody who is watching the live streaming. So I'm going to ask a question, but then after that, I hope that actually we can try and develop this into a conversation. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please do. And there will be questions coming in via Twitter and via Facebook as well. But one of the pleasures, I've been to a number of departure lounges, and one of the reasons that I've always loved it is not just about the range of work that you can see, but also, in fact, about the conversations that take place. So let's try and make this a conversation. I'm going to get the members of the panel to just introduce themselves, And the question that I'm going to ask you each is, what are the particular challenges at a time when it feels that the sector is really in a state of flux and is changing? What are the particular challenges that you face in your kind of daily roles? But also, I'd quite like you to identify the wider challenges of the sector. Tarek, I'm going to start with you.
Great, yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Tarek. I work at Battersea Art Centre. So I guess what feels like a very daily challenge that I face constantly, and I think is a kind of collective challenge, is I think you hit the nail on the head, Lynn. It feels like it's just a unique moment where everything sort of feels in flux, that the next few years might be quite turbulent for all sorts of reasons, partly in society, economically, and so on. So that feels like a good moment to try to break a few things up that have been quite static for a long time. And I suppose on a daily basis, sort of thinking a lot about how radical we can be in terms of altering who works in the arts, who benefits from the arts, who's represented, which voices and stories are told. And I think that's a big collective question that we're all wrestling with. I'd say that's probably a sector-wide question. But I guess within all that, knowing that if we are going to shake things around and we're going to try to disrupt things and really push forward so that everyone feels they have a stake and are involved, how do we protect people while that's happening, I suppose, is the sector-wide. How do we look after artists? How do we look after our communities and people while that change is ongoing? I think is a key question for the sector.
What do you mean by protect?
I mean that, you know, when you have a stable structure, for all its faults, people usually understand the avenues through it, they usually understand what the opportunities are, and also some people are benefiting that will sort of feel that they have a route in. When you start to disrupt that and say who's been excluded, who do we need to support, who do we need to bring into that picture, occasionally some people will feel left out, suddenly opportunities will be closed, it may create friction between people as we sort of work out how to spend our resources efficiently across the board. So I think we have to protect people in the sense of make sure that that conversation is constructive, is positive, that everyone understands we're on the same side and we're working together to try to achieve something better rather than just say there'll be winners and losers in this process.
Yeah. It would strike me that there's also potentially something around the idea of that when disruptions happen, and after all, we've all just kind of lived through 20 years of kind of utterly ongoing kind of cultural shift in every way, that there is absolutely no ever going back to normal, and secondly, that we don't let that happen, because in some ways, one can look around and say, yeah, you know, change is taking place. There are many gains being made, but actually we also know from the past how easily actually those gains can be lost. Yeah. Charlotte.
Hello everyone. Oh, no, I knew that would happen. I'm Charlotte. I am the incoming Joint Artistic Director of Plough with the brilliant Katie Posner, and we begin in 2 weeks, so we've not actually started yet. But at the moment I work as Associate Director at Soho Theatre as well, so I can talk a bit from both sides. I'd say one of the challenges that I've really observed, I was in the independent sector for 10 years, and then kind of went on to Soho and now going into Plough. And I think that there's still a real lack of communication between the independent sector and buildings and bigger companies, and also a lack of transparency, particularly around money. I've got this weird thing, I'm obsessed with talking about money. I talk about it a lot. Because I don't think we talk about it enough, basically, in the sector. And I think that particularly kind of having been in a building, I think there's a real sense of people not being open enough about what they can pay, how they can pay that, what people's needs are in terms of pay, what the deal is, and also even small things like when you invite an independent artist into a meeting to talk about their project, that's their time, and how do you make sure as a building that you maximise, you know, you do your prep enough to go your hour travelling here and your hour in the building within your hour leaving is you've come away with some answers, not just a general chat because I'm sat on my nice salary and that's been a nice thing for me to do in the middle of my day. So I think that's the thing. I think in terms of the wider sector, one of the things that is shifting, obviously, which is brilliant, but is still, I think, would be naive to say that it's not still there, is that there's this kind of overhang of this idea of an artistic director as sort of rock star. And I think that that's kind of been the historic context of artistic directors quite a lot. And I think that what that's meant is it's meant that those certain people have felt like they're, and have been to a point, untouchable, when they should have been touchable. And obviously a lot of them are starting to topple now, and that's kind of moving on and progressing. I think that's brilliant, but I think there's still a real overhang of that in the industry, and I think that there's a bit of a sense of, oh, and that's all gone now, and I don't think it has, sadly.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Sarah, are you a rock star?
No. Probably the diametric opposite to a rock star.
I'm just really quite interested to ask both Tarek and Sarah, who are people who run buildings, yes, about, you know, how actually you do deal with the independent sector. Yeah. I mean, I know, Sarah, that, you know, you do absolutely try and have a kind of cup of tea with anybody who approaches you. I mean, Tarek, having recently taken over at Battersea Arts Centre, what is kind of your aim in terms of interacting with independent artists, and what is the reality when sometimes you're sorting out the drains?
You know, Lynn, it's such a big question, and I want to be so honest about it, but it's kind of quite challenging. So I guess, because I also am an independent artist, only been in this job for 2 months, and you go into the job and you sort of think, Battersea Arts Centre has a brilliant history of being completely open. So anyone who ever writes to me, I will always meet them, and I have been meeting everyone that's kind of written to me and sort of engaging with and trying to pay for their transport to be there, and so on, doing all those little things that I remember as being an artist were important. But I still, even in the first few months, feel like I'm getting so many things wrong so many times, and that is really hard. And I guess in the spirit of openness, just to share a really live story for me. So we had a brilliant dinner 2 nights ago where we invited lots of local community members, artists, people we know, to sort of discuss Battersea Arts Centre and how we can be more open and more representative, inclusive. And a lady came up to me who I'd met at a previous function before, and she said, you know, Tarek, it's good to see you again. I'm really upset that you didn't reply to the email I sent you inviting you to. She had an opening the other week, and so she'd sent it last week and I hadn't replied, and she started crying. And she didn't do that in any intentional cynical. It was just so difficult to have that conversation, and it was very hard for me. It was a good reminder that I have to prioritize those communications and conversations, and sometimes that's really difficult when you're overworked. But I suppose opening the bigger conversations, I went home to that night to say I am going to reply to everyone, because it's so important to do that. And I sifted through 200 emails that I'd received in 6 weeks to try to respond personally to people. And that struck me as part of the issue is not just about openness and communication, the sheer volume of artists with great ideas, with opportunities, and we just, as a sector, just don't have the capacity to deal with that volume is part of the issue. It's not just about how organizations behave. So I want to just put a mea culpa. All of us have really good intentions, but I definitely get things wrong all the time.
And I'm going to ask you kind of in 3 months' time, next time, whether you are still, you know, replying to all those emails.
I just echo what Tarek said. So yesterday was a really key example. So I'd arranged to meet someone who runs a local community centre with our one of our learning practitioners, Tom, and our producer, Stuart. And it was, for some reason, I booked it in on the opening day of Departure Lounge. And I don't know why I did that, but I did. And then at the same time, a designer had texted me that morning, gone, I'm in Derby, can we talk about the show that we're going into rehearsals for in 2 weeks? And then somebody had said, oh, the Creative Industries Council UK are going to be in Derby. Can you just welcome them to the Departure Lounge Festival and whatever? And I very nearly cancelled that meeting in the community centre. And I didn't, and I'm really glad I didn't. But it was a real and in the end, I didn't. And I'm so glad, because I did spend the entire hour talking to him, and I had to stop myself and make sure I was active listening, because actually what I was thinking was, what's happening back at the venue? What's going on? But actually what I learned from him was enormous, and goes into your first question, Lynn, about what's facing the sector, is that, the brilliant Dean, if he's watching, he runs this community centre. He's got a full-time job. He runs this community centre completely voluntarily. And thanks to the work that our learning team are doing, he's been able to do workshops with kids and stuff. And he literally said, this time last year we were going to close down, but because you can hire our venue now and you're doing these workshops with our young people in our community, then I'm about to run a family fun day that is completely free, and that is completely funded. I don't have to go to the council for funding. And you just go all right, okay. And that just really landed with me. I was like, thank God I didn't cancel. But hands up, I nearly did. And I have done in other times. And there are emails that I've gone, oh yeah, I'll get to, and I haven't got to. But I think it's about constantly having to be live to that conversation about who you're making work for, knowing that you're not a rock star. I think you're really right. I think that still does exist. And I think there are rock stars within rock stars. I think maybe like, you know, I'm like, I don't know, someone really unknown and rubbish at the moment. You know, and there are other artistic directors who are rock stars who work, you know, they won't reply to my emails either, so you're not on your own. And I think we do have to break that, but also we have to find more capacity. I'm very dependent on the team that I have here, really dependent on them. But I know that they're all overworked, working to max capacity. And so sometimes, you know, I'll delegate to them, but I know that they're also working at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So, yeah, that's a conundrum, I think.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because whenever in these kind of circumstances like this, it's absolutely clear that everybody in the whole sector is kind of just completely under pressure. But I suppose that even when I hear Tarek and you, Sarah, talk about that, you know, and about the difficulties, obviously, that you face, there is also a kind of part of me that also goes, but there is a fundamental imbalance of power, yes?
And
That it's about knocking on a door and about the fact that, yes, that you do have salaries and all those other people who are working at over capacity also are being paid, whereas artists in the sector are not.
And that's what you've always got to say to yourself, like, it's what I get paid for. Do you know what I mean? It's why I get paid the big bucks, not the so big bucks, but the bigger bucks. Do you know what I mean? That's why, you're very privileged to be in this position. You're only going to be in this position for so long. Your job is to open the door and hand the keys over. That's your job. It's not about what you want to do.
Have I hijacked slightly about your challenges?
No,
Okay, that's fine. Shall we move on then to Jo? Yes.
Hi, I'm Jo. I am executive producer for 1927 Theatre Company. I'm also collaborate with an artist called Kazuko Hoki, the inventor of Scratch, a real rock star, who's a solo artist and theatre maker. And I also am the co-director of the Total Theatre Network that delivers the Total Theatre Awards at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Greatest challenges. The biggest challenge, I would say, at the moment, there's kind of threefold. One is the jigsaw puzzle of securing the resource that's needed to create work. And as a flip side of that, to sustain a livelihood as artists, as producers, as creators, as makers, as stage managers, as production managers, as anyone who's working in the kind of independent sector. And the other thing that I think is becoming an increasing challenge, I work with artists and companies who make work, whether you want to call that devised work, whatever, it's process-driven work, that it's not based on scripts, or doesn't come from the old-fashioned way of making work. And I'm increasingly seeing a return back to programming that's based on scripts. And I think the space for independent, collaborative, ensemble, different process-led work, we've jumped back 20 years.
Okay.
Can I add two quick points, Lynn? Sorry, two more challenges that I didn't say. One that I think we don't talk enough about, or maybe we haven't solved it, is arts education. It's, you know, nationally, it's not being recognised as being important that our young people are studying that. So I think that's really crucial, and we have to talk about that. And the second thing was about, so we're in lots of conversations about how we, and as Tarek said, about how we engage our community and have those conversations in the work, and this cool new word, which to me is just something we've been doing forever, but co-curation or co-production or whatever it is this week. But actually, I'm interested in, as an independent sector, how do you do it as independents? Because it takes more resource, not less. So actually, how do you genuinely, you know, not just go and do a workshop somewhere and then go, yeah, we consulted with the community. How do you genuinely engage those voices who don't think? How do we genuinely, those people who don't think of themselves as artists, they don't access in good company because they're an artist, because they don't even know they're an artist yet. How do you genuinely have that conversation? And it's hard for us And that meeting yesterday reminded me of how hard it is for us, but it's even harder if you're an independent company. And I'm interested in how we solve that.
Anybody want to?
I was just, well, yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this last night, weren't we? That I think I feel like I can sometimes forget that it takes a certain level of confidence to go, oh, there's a playwriting workshop. I'm going to try and try that and see what I think about it. And what that takes is for somebody to go, oh, I would imagine I could be a playwright, which is such a massive hurdle in itself. And I think also there's a lot of kind of I don't know, it's interesting, like, I feel like as I've kind of moved through my career, I forget things that at once might have seemed, that I think are obvious to me now, that are just not obvious that are not obvious, you know. So I've got a niece, for example, who lives in Newcastle, and she's 17, and she's had a difficult life for various reasons, and she was doing a course in a college, drama course in a college, and I saw her recently, just after I got the job at Plough. And I said to her, oh, yeah, so how's your course going? She said, oh, I've stopped because you can't get a job in drama, in theatre. There's no jobs in theatre. And I went, oh, but I said, but I've got a job in theatre. And she went, yeah, but you're posh. And I was like, no, I'm not posh. Mate, I'm not posh. Oh, because this is my boyfriend's this, you know, so I've not known her too long. And I thought, why would... And she just presumed I was posh because I worked in theatre. So for I've only met her a handful of times, so I'm not uber close to her, but it was just really interesting to me. I was like, oh... What? So there's just all this assumption that sat with that, and I was like, how? Now she could be rubbish. She could have no artistic talent whatsoever, or she could be incredible. And the sad thing for me is like, we'll never find out. We'll never discover whether she is or not, because she's already put that barrier on herself. And I think that's a challenge that sometimes that we can forget how invisible that is.
Yeah. And it may not be actually that she's put the barrier on herself. It's something about what we exude, yes, that actually has created that barrier for her. And I think that there's absolutely that kind of argument that goes on, which, you know, is one of the reasons that I really, really think that actually where the money for the arts should go actually is into grassroots and into communities and into work with communities. And I suppose that comes to the fact that, you know, I don't think the idea of that, you know, that the purpose is to create lots more artists, but actually I think it really is to create a situation where everybody, in terms of kind of, you know, has an arts education and all the things that brings to them for the rest of their lives. Do people have got things that they want to ask, or things that they want to, you know, want to kind of interject into the conversation? Good, right at the back there. Can you say who you are? Yeah.
We'll just get a microphone to you.
Okay.
So, hey. Thanks, Sam.
Hi, so I'm Sheila Snellgrove, and I've come up from Plymouth for today.
Brilliant.
And my question is a sort of provocation, really, because we know that resources are finite, and like theatres and organisations like my own have a certain amount of power, but if we want to transfer that power, as you've been saying, to communities and genuinely do that, what are we willing to give up?
Yeah.
Because power is a finite resource, you know, and capacity. So how do we need to redescribe ourselves in order to genuinely do that and not just say it in conferences like this?
Yeah. That is such a brilliant question, because I think the question of how do you get out of the way, is a really important one. It seems to me that one would only go back as kind of a few years, and there would be a thing that I often used to kind of quite quote, actually. It was the thing that came from George Devine when he was running the Royal Court. And he was asked by a journalist, like, what is your theatre's policy? And he said, policy is who you work with. you know, and that is kind of makes it quite simple who you work with, you know, if they are people who do not look like you, sound like you, have the same background as you and all those things. But I kind of think that that gets to something about that we've moved on even further, because I think there's kind of quite a lot of understanding of that. But then there is an issue about how do you cede power? How do you get out of the way? Joe, do you want to talk first? Not if you don't want to.
I mean, I think it's interesting, because I think it's very different if you are a company versus a building, because, you know, if you're creating work, you've always worked collaboratively. So it's less of a, how do we do that? Because you're kind of probably already doing it and always have been doing it. And I think perhaps actually it's about joining up the conversations. We very much we conventionally taken leadership as being about buildings and kind of people running those big institutions and organisations. Actually, the Grassroots has been doing this for years. They've been working with their communities, they've been working with their neighbours, they've been working with partners all over the place. They know how to join up, we know how to join up dots and to make things happen. So I think the first thing I would suggest is let's have more conversations as a sector across hierarchies and start changing things. Because I think there's a hell of a lot of knowledge within the sector that isn't acknowledged and is very often invisible to those in more kind of positions of conventional power, as it were.
Can you give examples of those?
I mean, there's so many different examples. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think, what are we doing at the moment? I mean, it's interesting. So, 1927, we're based in Margate. Margate's a really interesting town. It's coastal, southeast of England, extremely deprived in terms of it's got the 10% highest deprivation in children under 16 in Europe. But it's also got a huge migration of artists who are moving there and gentrifying. So there's this really kind of conflicting space. And when we became one of those artists and companies that bought an old shop and kind of moved there, we were really mindful of how do we integrate and not parachute in and take a couple of years to begin to get to know how to do things. And what we decided was the best way of doing that was just to focus on getting to know our neighbours. And where our studio is a really particularly complex part of Cliftonville in Margate, if anyone knows it. There's lots of new studios cropping up, but it is also literally where it's got huge immigrant populations, loads of children will literally walk around the streets with nothing on their feet sometimes. And you're kind of like, okay, we can see what this is. So, rather than kind of going, okay, let's parachute in and do things, step by step, we've been kind of knocking on doors where we know children are and going, do you want to come and do a workshop up the road? And they're like, no. And they're like, okay, well, the door's open, come along. And then gradually they start to. And then, 2 weeks later, they're knocking on the door of the studio asking to borrow the bike pump because we let them the bike pump. We keep going, do you want the bike pump or do you really want to come back in and learn how to animate again? Because actually there was something was unlocked there. So I think that, it's a grassroots tiny little thing, but for us, that kind of absolutely working collaboratively and getting to know and build relationships with people locally on the ground is the key to kind of building bigger sense of community.
I think that's fantastic. I was talking recently to Doreen Foster, who is at Warwick Arts Centre, and she was kind of suggesting, that idea that somehow that, I think she was talking really around in relation probably, to audiences and very much with, community, and about that idea that people who run buildings want people to come into your building. But she kind of suggested that actually, a bit like the idea that instead actually you have to go out to them, and it's a bit like that thing of when you're a kid and you play in the street, yeah? That you go out and you play in the street and you meet people in the street, and then somebody says, do you want to come back to ours, to our back garden? And then eventually you get kind of invited to stay to tea, and then after a while you're quite happily going in and out of each other's kind of houses and staying, and I thought that was kind of quite good. Do either of you have something you'd like to add to this?
I think the biggest, I think I'm feeling a little bit positive about the change and disruption, I guess, because I think the biggest change that needs to happen, I suppose, is, and it's not about organizations only, it's about everyone who's engaged, is a change of mindset. So I think we all recognize the old model, which is there are buildings or there are venues where it's about the artistic director's vision and it's about the art and this is what we're going to make and you have to fit into our program, and then it creates this weird imbalance where artists are trying to fit into that idea of what those people want or think that they want. Communities feel excluded because every time they engage, it's on the rules that that building sets or the process and the whole system. I feel that mindset has been completely upended in the last few years in a really positive way. And I think people are genuinely asking the question, what are we for and who do we serve? And what is our responsibilities with the resources that we have? And I guess one thing I'm finding very useful in the current role is, I mean, we barely talk about theatre in the program, though obviously it's a big part of what we do, but we are increasingly talking about supporting people's creativity, however they want to express it, and how we as an organization support that and present that work. And a lot of what we do is work with professional artists and other people. But just as a concrete example, we've been running locally for many years a program called The Agency with young people locally who we have a complex methodology that we work with where they develop their own creative ideas and we support them, bringing all the resources, the artists, the links that we have to enable that to happen. So we've ended up developing football clubs locally, which help refugees learn English. We've sort of developed music nights, local town nights that are now part of Glastonbury and touring nationally and internationally. And those are young people who I think most of the world has written off in those kind of cultural sector previously, who are now doing more amazing things than we could possibly have imagined had it been an artistic vision that we're trying to implement. So I think it's that concrete change of what are we for and how do those resources work and being more open and who can benefit that is critical. But I do think it's happening, so I guess I don't take a negative view on it.
I think there's something really interesting, though, that arises from that, which is, of course, that thing when things are upended, and I think you referred to it, and when there is disruption and things are in change, there is also sometimes a feeling that, in fact, a different group of people start feeling that they might be excluded from opportunities that they previously had. And so, and in fact, we had a little conversation about this kind of recently, which is around that idea that if you absolutely change how an organization sees itself and how it kind of operates, the effect that that then has on its program and about actually potentially on those independent artists who in the past might have seen that particular place as their home.
And that's where I felt, again, being transparent, the most interesting pushback is within independent artists who we still massively support and develop, but in terms of saying we will express creativity in different ways, involve people, and saying to independent artists, you have a critical professional role within this change because you have skills and experience that no one else has, but still some people feel very threatened by that. And so it is a complex, it needs to be a very open conversation, I think.
Sheila, I'm just kind of quite interested, perhaps what, do you have kind of direct kind of experience and things that you have been trying to do at the Barbican in Plymouth?
Yeah, I think we have always...
Or maybe, yes.
Oh, sorry. I think the Barbican has always worked at Grassroots and devised and co-created materials with our young people. We're a talent development organisation, so that's what we do. But I'm really interested, I think, to see a change in how organisations that have a lot of resource make those resources much more available, and how the democratisation of those resources. And I actually think we're only at the very, very beginning of that. Because whereas, we are going out and we are going into communities more, actually, I talk about, giving people access to the means of production, which I know is an old Marxian term, but I think it's very relevant, even more relevant now. So there's one level, which is like, we're going out and we're engaging new people. But then how do the resources and the infrastructure, which enables those things to really grow and manifest themselves and become change in our society, really do happen? So I guess my challenge back is we are doing it, we're beginning to do it, but how are we really willing to change to make those, to really catalyse something major to happen in terms of democratisation of the arts?
And it doesn't have to, just in terms of that, it doesn't have to mean that you isolate other people. So to give an example, we made a production, Caroline's in the room, who kind of spearheaded it, Solace of the Road, which was on our main stage, which was a co-production with Young People in Care. And they were involved right from the start. And it was our big production, it was our big spring production. They were involved in the initiation of it, in the writing of it, in all of those things. Professional actors performed it, they weren't on stage. Since then, we've done other things where they've co-performed as well. but they were, you know, they were heavily involved. And for a long time, we were having a conversation about how do we actually, like the rights to this production, because at one point we thought it might go further. How do we financially give these young people something back as well? Because actually, it's, you know, they've put into this. So where's that conversation as well? And where does the intellectual property sit with that production? And I think you're right. We're right at the beginning of that, and that was a game changer for us as a theatre, because suddenly we weren't just talking about the work that we take out into the community or making nice things that happen in the community. We're talking about actually our main stage, our stuff that we do. And this was like 4 or 5 years ago. It was a complete game changer in terms of how we now think about our main traditional programme. And I think in 10 years' time, our main traditional programme won't look like what it looks like, but at the moment it does. So it's not good enough just to go, oh, well, that we do that and then we do this. It's about actually how do those two things come together. And I think that's a really important conversation, and we are only just at the start of that. And I think you're right. Like, and the easy thing is to say, throw the keys away to all the buildings and give the money out to the community. And I have said that, hands up. But actually, once you start thinking about it and once you start actually working it a little bit, you go, no, but there has to be temples of art. There has to be places where people come together and go, this is why I'm here. Because, you know, there are sports centres, there are libraries. It's the same thing. But it's about who runs them, how they're run, what their civic responsibility is, who has access to those resources, and what that conversation, everything that Tarek and Joe have said, really.
And also, I think, isn't it, it's about actually how you are partnering up with those people who are already on the ground, who kind of actually are really properly embedded in the community in a way that you may not yet know. I think there's a thing that Madani Eunice has said, which I think is very good, which is that idea that as arts organisations, you're not the protagonist in your story, you know, and that actually you don't need to look about, you know, in a sense that what you have to earn is trust, that's the most kind of fundamental thing. I think there's somebody up here,
There's questions on this side as well.
Oh, right, okay.
Hello, I'm Martin. Doesn't seem to be working. Hello. I'm independent. I've got a story to tell. I don't like the word artist. I'm not sure why, but I've applied to the Arts Council, and to cut a long story short, the show is called Ferguson's Gang, and it's a story that I want to tell. They came back to me and said, the quality, we can't guarantee the quality. So I'm in conversation with an artistic director who has also said, we can't assess the quality. So I wanted to bring into this conversation how quality is judged, perhaps, within, particularly if you're getting into a community and that sort of thing. So that's my question, I think.
Good question.
Thank you very much.
Shanna.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, it's the kind of worms, isn't it? Is it quality? Yeah, of course. It's not judged by a set of criteria, and it's not linear. And I think I'd imagine that I'm trying to think how people judge quality, what that would mean from the Arts Council perspective. But I suppose that it's kind of I'd imagine what they're looking for, can't speak for them, is a sort of sense of a track record of work that you've done previously. And is that the kind of thing that have you had a meeting with them? Like, have they said to you, have you asked them that question, I suppose? Why not? You can have a meeting with the arts. Do you mean to say, if you were to ask for feedback? I've had meetings, when I was independent, I'd have a meeting. If we got rejected from a funding application, I'd have a meeting and say, how would you define quality? Or I'd try and unpick their feedback a little bit and say...
I've had one really good meeting.
Okay.
So they've been as helpful as they possibly can. But
Yeah.
they won't actually discuss the individual application, which is the way that goes. But, yeah.
Okay.
It was just to say, like,
Hang on a minute, Beth, we need to get you on mic just because of live stream.
Oh, God.
it was just to say, just one bit of advice is that when we were really early on, we were advised to kind of build really good mentors into the application. So even though we didn't have a reputation, we had, say, a producer mentor, or we had a director mentor, or certain people that were coming into the room and helping us to develop our craft, so that when they looked at the application, it benefited us obviously within the process, but they could see that even though we might be very early on, that we'd got a good supportive network around us that was going to help us create a good piece of work. So that was just...
The show I'm talking about had a sellout in studio
Joe,
Yeah,
yes,
I mean,
Anna, would you mind being a roving mic as well? Thank you.
What is interesting is, I don't know if anyone else has been involved in the Arts Council consultation for the next 10 years. There is a question, one of the questions that they were asking the other day is how they assess quality. And one of the big areas of feedback from everyone that was sitting around the table I was at was, how do you assess quality if you haven't seen an artist or a storyteller or whoever's kind of work? And it is something they are genuinely questioning. So what I would say to everyone who's interested in this conversation is make sure you feed into that Arts Council consultation that's influencing their next 10-year strategy. Really, really important that they hear the voices of how do you assess quality. What I would say with my flipping my hat as Total Theatre Awards on is, you can't assess quality through assessing an application. And I say that on the basis of 6 years worth of 65 hours worth of conversations with 50 people a year looking at diversity of productions. It's so subjective, it's so problematic to kind of just do it on the basis of work. I think you're absolutely right. I think it is about building networks in order to get that foot in the door, first of all, to kind of tick the box that says, I've got a group of people around me which are absolute. Yes, I put a show on in a studio and it's sold out. So, hello. Keep endorsing that, but absolutely build people around you which will endorse, will act as your champions, essentially, that will enable somebody to go, which is horrible, because again, it's reinforcing hierarchical structures, and that is problematic. And actually, it's a contradiction to everything anyone says about this being an inclusive and open and diverse opportunities. It's like, no, it's not, is it? Because you're saying that you have to have a stamp of approval in order to access. But that said, if that's what you need to do, it is about building peer networks and groups and just going, these people are supporting me, put in letters of endorsement, put in people in place. I usually am happy to go down on anyone's application and go, of course, because I know that that was what was required when I started.
Yeah, they only allow one attachment, but yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Tarek, but as somebody who has recently been working at the Arts Council, do you have any...
All I can say is a very live conversation, and I wasn't shy internally of expressing my own views about it, I guess. Yeah. I think what I would say is that, I suppose part of the point of this, I don't want to speak for the Arts Council because I don't want to, but part of the point of doing this, I suppose, is to be a bit provocative, and I guess I can only speak for me personally. I don't really subscribe to the philosophy of art for art's sake, I guess. And a lot of people do, and that's a very live conversation, is why do we have art, how do we make work, what is that all for? I guess when I am in a conversation with people who want to make work, the questions I am asking myself is not a question of quality. The question I'm asking myself is, who is this for? Is this relevant? Who is this going to bring into the building? How does the story reach other people? What does it do for the artist or the person who's trying to make it? Is this part of their own development? And those are the questions that seem very present and very real. And just saying it's about quality is a shortcut, is a lazy way of describing something quite complicated. Yeah. And I totally agree, form doesn't do that, but in fairness to the Arts Council, it's almost an impossible job to allocate resources, so you do need some criteria. And there are a lot of people in the sector who say quality is important, who come and knock on the Arts Council door and say, if you're not measuring quality, what are you about? Yeah. So in fairness to them, there are multiple views that they're juggling.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely a reflection, isn't it, of, again, how much things are shifting and changing. After all, it's, not that long ago that we had Brian McMaster doing his kind of big inquiry into excellence. Now, actually, people are talking at the Arts Council and elsewhere much more about relevance and those, so, and the two, of course, are absolutely not, it's not binary. They're not opposed in any way whatsoever. They go hand in hand. Can we move on over here?
Hello, my name's Elliot, and we run a company called The Wild and the Innocent. small-scale company. And so I suppose the advice we've been maybe given, or the place we're at, is the next step would be to do a kind of small-scale small-scale touring around arts venues, that sort of thing, that kind of idea. And it's really interesting here, Lynn and Joe, you talk about kind of grassroots. The problem with that stage of touring is you're lucky enough to get a night at these venues, and it's lovely that those buildings offer you a night. But those conversations tend to be about your box office split and what time you're getting in and your tech. And what I found, and I talked to a musician about this who's trying to do the same problem to do with rural touring in music, is that what happens then, you do the show to the same, sometimes few people that always go and support everything in our arts venue, and then you go to the pub and you meet people, and they go, oh, well, you were doing a show, that sounds great, can I come and see it? And you go, well, it was tonight. And then we're moving on, and you only do 4 shows, and it's utterly frustrating. And we talk about it's grassroots, and that's great if you have a building, if you have your own building that you can bring people to. But if you're interested in doing that kind of small-scale touring, how do we change the model so that it's not just tokenism, it's not just an afternoon of doing a workshop for one age of school kids that may come or may not come that night? How do you actually build up those relationships in an area and maintain those relationships? Because that takes extra money, extra funding, extra time of those buildings and those relationships. In a model that's really built for you turning up for one night and doing, like, how do we change that model to as we're talking about actually engaging? I don't know.
Okay, do people want to respond to the... Yes, okay, then, yes.
Oh, hi, my name's David Lane. I'm a rural touring promoter. I'm also a director of Live and Local, which is the rural touring scheme for the Midlands. So to answer your question, rural touring schemes will put together a mini tour for theatre companies. If, to pick up on what we were talking about earlier, the quality is correct. So in Live and Local for the coming season, theatre tours can be between 6 and 18 dates within the area. So my advice would be to have a look at the NRTF, National Rural Touring Forum website, on which there is a guide called Eyes Wide Open, which gives you the nuts and bolts of rural touring. Don't think of rural touring as being at the bottom of the heap, nor that the audience will look at everything. Audiences, I think, in rural communities are much more eclectic, because in my venue they see a show once a month, and it might be music, it might be dance, it might be theatre.
But are they not the audiences that always come? Do you see what I mean? How do you engage in a different demographic?
Yeah. Right, in our venue, about 25% of the audience are regulars, but 10% of the people I con into helping, okay? But the rest are people who are typically drawn from the community. So 70% of my audience are within a mile of the venue, but they differ. So you will see different people for music, within music, between folk and classical, for instance. So we draw on a large part of the community to involve them in your work. And it has to be good quality, to pick up on what Tarek was saying earlier.
I was just going to say, I think a really important thing is about residencies. Don't underestimate, and I don't mean the advertised residencies. I used to work with Ridiculousness, and 20 years ago they were making work in village halls. So what they were doing is they were persuading somebody to give them the keys to the village hall, and then they were going to the pub each night and getting to know those people, and then they were saying, they weren't doing an advertised show, they were going, are you around on Friday night, do you want to come along and watch what we're doing? And they would open the doors. So they were able to actually build relationships with those communities. I mean, 20 years down the line, they're still going back to some of those places now and still doing that, because the cycle of resource and support means they are no longer being funded. So they're having to go back to those spaces to make work. I think in terms of, for me as a producer, that's always been the key to building the ability to make work with every artist I've ever collaborated with, is finding those partnerships in places and spaces, whether that's a village hall in the Highlands of Scotland, or at the moment, 1927 are rehearsing in London in a visitors centre that hasn't been being used. And we've done a deal with the Friends of the Park that we'll feed the swans. That sounds stupid. That's what we're doing. That's how we're paying. And actually, we're sharing it with the friends of that park next week, what we're doing. It's a show that's going to the Edinburgh International Festival. That's a great opportunity. So think a little bit outside the box, because it is also the jigsaw puzzle of how you make the work, but it's also how you build a grassroots community, like audience, and begin to slightly flip that thing of it being all about one-nighters, because that's not sustainable, and touring in this country is really broken.
You wanted to come in, yes? Could we get...
Hi, I feel like I've got about 17 points, so I'm going to try to boil them down. I'm Ang Harrod, I'm Joint Artistic Director of Fifth Word, a new writing touring company. And there's so many interesting conversations going on, but I am really interested in what you're saying in terms of, the touring circuit at the moment and the one night and 2 nights, because and totally linked then to what we're talking about engaging our audiences and working with our communities, because the last few national tours that we've had, we've probably done 19 venues of 1 or 2 nights, 17 venues of 1 or 2 nights, going in and trying to do workshops, and then I'm doing a spring-summer national tour next year. I should say its name to plug it, shouldn't I, Lava? And the strategy for us this time has just been to kind of look at doing fewer venues, but trying to have more deeper, meaningful engagement work when we're there. But I'm kind of finding it hard to work out how exactly that does work really well. And kind of flipping the kind of theatre touring work, I also work with the community. I was at Derby Uni, we set up here years ago, and I've always worked in Normanton, which is a really kind of multicultural, diverse, amazing and unique suburb of Derby, literally just up the road. And I developed a HLF project, Heritage Lottery funded project, called This Is Normanton, which looked at kind of just getting under the skin of that community a bit and collected oral histories about people who... There's a hub in Normanton called Normanton Road, where you can find pretty much anything under the sun. And so just interviewing people along those roads, collecting oral histories that are now held in our local archive. And then that kind of led me into working with the Roma community, which is the new influx of the community there, and working with them. And in the end, I brought 15 of them to a show here, The Fishermen, that was on, that I'd worked on as associate director as well. But it took me 1.5 years to get under the skin of that community and a Heritage Lottery Fund to help me do that. And I'm just trying to work out at the moment, what is the participatory offer that we're making when we go into these venues, like as indies to talk about as well, but also how is that helped by the venues on board? And I think now my next tour coming up hopefully is kind of week-longs. Well, yeah, it is week-longs, a couple of weeks in London, 3 and 4 nights. But I'm offering talent development stuff through the new writing. We're offering workshops, and then I'm trying to look at the patterns that I use to get into Normanton to help work with these other communities. But I've worked in Normanton for 10 years, started running after-school clubs there, when I was 22, I'm 38. Do you know what I mean? So it takes a long time. But so they're kind of linked, but separate. And I think exactly what you said, how do we bring it all together? And that is a real struggle. I'm going to this pot. My Arts Council bid would be so high if I put in all my participatory costs as well. They're trying to get the show on the road. I don't think that was a question, was it? Sorry.
I think it just makes some amazing points, and I think that touring is broken, as we've said. This is scary, isn't it? Starting a touring with a touring company, but also, I might just leave now. But I think it's the long term. I think it is a long term. I think there are no quick fixes. I think that from looking at stuff that Plough has done with Roundabout, which is their pop-up plug-in theatre space, which is brilliant. But that goes for a week into 8 different places each year, and they do a huge amount of pre-participation workshop engagement work. But then when they get there, each one is a bespoke curated festival for each particular space it goes into. And it's huge and it's really expensive and there's no financial return on it. But it is important. And I think that's the only way that then you can build those audiences. And I think it takes time. I think it takes, and we can see from Paints Plough's statistics that they have increased their audiences, you know, and therefore the financial risk that the venues have been willing to take on their work has increased alongside that, because they've gone, okay, we had 20 people this year, and then the next year we doubled it. We can start to kind of edge that financial thing up. But I think in terms of what you're saying as well about the kind of one-nighters, I mean, yeah, it's about going and kind of, so before I did what I did now, I worked for a company called Rashdash, who are a touring company as well, and we did a scheme called Become a Rashdasher, it was called, and it was about talking to communities. It was about going, we're not just going to go, great, thank you, Northern Stage, we've got 2 nights in your theatre, and we're going to rock up and take our guarantee and hope you tell people it's happening, and we'll do some flyering and no one cares. It was, and I always think about my sister, because my sister used to work in arts marketing, and she always used to say to me, I'd be like, I've made this great show, and nobody's come to see it, and I don't know why. And she'd always go, but really, Charlotte, why should anyone give a shit? And I was just like, oh yeah. And she's like, just because you give a shit doesn't mean anyone else should. And of course she's right, like why should they? So the people in the pub who met you after your show and went, oh, that sounded cool, well, they need to know about it before you need to be meeting them. We need to be saying that this is why. And I think that face-to-facing is important as well. And of course that takes time, and of course we need independent. It's time and it's money, but I sort of think that's the way it is, and as it stands, do you know what I mean?
It comes back to us, and I think talking from a venue perspective, it comes back to we're still siloing things. So my creative learning team are fantastic artists in their own right, and they're making this brilliant work. How often do they make work connected to studio shows that are in for 1 or 2 nights? Not very often, hands up, not very often, because they're busy doing all those things. But also as an industry, in the last month we've been given 2 strategic bids for 1.5 million and 1.1 million. The 1.5 million you all know about because everyone's written about it in the stage and everyone's talking about it, and isn't that exciting? We're doing producing hubs, amazing, well done us, great, go for Derby. We also got 1.1 million, which is not that much less money, to do participatory work across the city. No one wants to talk to us about that. Now, to us, as a building, those 2 absolutely sit next to each other and are layered to each other. And Caroline and I are trying to work out a matrix of how these 2 projects work together. But actually, as an industry, we're still not talking about that. We're still not talking about participatory and learning work like it's important. And until we start talking about like it's important, until we start funding that work, then we won't do what you're talking about. And I totally agree, it is broken. And I know, we have moved away from offering splits, and we offer guarantees. Lauren's our programmer, small guarantees for starters, but we do that because that felt like a commitment. But it's not good enough. I know it's not good enough. I know the guarantee isn't big enough. I know, I know all of these things. But I sit there in the venue going, how do I make this work? How do we financially make this work? And so I think if we've got these venues, then we need to put more onus on them and really take more time to think about how we're carving up that money to ensure that these models develop. But I think it's a good question. It's made me think, like, actually, we don't think about the studio programme in the same way. We do for residencies, so with Curious Monkey and things like that, yeah, residencies, but if things are jumping in for a night, it's a very different thing.
Well, with that money, Sarah, obviously, hi, I'm Caroline. The model is that those independent companies will be making those pieces in those communities. Yeah. So those pints of beer or whatever will be drunk and had with them as they're collecting their ideas and their stories to make those new pieces. So I suppose that's the way round that we're able to do it with this.
But only thanks to 2.6 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
It's not
yeah.
And of course there is another argument, which is that potentially actually where you should be doing the show is not in the local arts centre but in the pub.
Yeah.
Yeah?
yeah.
Totally.
Who funds that?
Yeah, of course it is, but it's kind of, yeah.
There's a lady here.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, and it's great to be here and listening to all this conversation. My name is Panya Banjoko, and I'm a writer, a poet by trade, but I'm also developing my playwriting career, originally from Nottingham. I'm saying this because I want to put it on the agenda and keep this out there, but it will also develop into a question, hopefully. I'm going back a step, I guess, and picking up from what you said about your niece, the anecdote of not seeing herself as a playwright and looking at it from a class perspective. And I guess because I'm a visible minority, I want to come from that perspective. And I guess my question is, what happens when somebody from a Black and Asian minority group recognizes themselves as wanting to be a playwright, go into an institution, but then the atmosphere that's being engendered isn't an inclusive atmosphere, and what can be done to kind of disrupt that situation and create structures in which somebody like myself can then challenge the status quo to say, well, actually, I have a right to be here, and make that environment much more of an inclusive environment. So, yeah, I guess that's my question, because even when I look at the panel, I can't see any representations of me. You're all fantastic, and it's great hearing what you're saying, but even just on that level of wanting to pull me in as an ethnic minority when I don't see, or very little, representation of people like me, what's being done about that?
Yeah, and on the panel discussion, that's really interesting in terms of representation, because it was something we really did talk about and think about, and we had a lot of invites out and didn't get any back able to be on this panel, but we are very aware that this panel isn't representative enough, and if you compare it to previous years, it's not as representative as others have been. So hands up, we tried and we failed. And because there's not enough artists at that level, that's why, because we were going to the same 5 people and they're like, I've been on 20 panels this year. Like, do you know what I mean? But absolutely, hands up, and we failed on that question.
But what I'm saying is that
the
stumbling block for that is right at the very beginning, when somebody like me walks into the door, and I'm greeted with a hostile environment. So what's being done at that ground level to welcome people like me into the fold, into the academy?
Yeah. So I can only tell you what we're doing at Derby, if that's helpful or interesting. So so we've just finished, I don't know if Rafia's here today. I'm not sure. She is here today. Rafia's here today. So we just finished working with Rafia and Tamasha Theatre Company through a programme called Sustained, which was about exactly looking at that issue. And Rafi can probably talk about it better, but basically it was all about developing us as a venue to be more inclusive, and that was a whole host of things. So, for instance, our staff team went on faith trails around the city, so we went to different places where we might meet different people to understand that. We've got an entire equalities and diversity action plan, which I can show you, where we're pushing forward for our workforce diversity to be representative of the city. So the city has about 25%. The AME, our workforce is currently at about 15%, needs to be at 25%, so we're moving forwards on that. So we're trying, but you're absolutely, it's slow. And for as you said, visible minorities and invisible minorities, we need to make these buildings much more inclusive. So there are things we're doing, and I'm really happy to talk to you in the bar afterwards. And if you're only in Nottingham, then you can help us. So.
Well, actually, I'm performing as part of the spoken word showcase here this
there you
evening
go.
at 5:30.
So that's a start, but it's not enough. So, yeah.
Charlotte is a new writing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because it was interesting you brought up the story of my niece, because what surprised me about that for myself was I thought, probably not arrogantly, but thought, is it about, a lot of it is about role models, but it's not just about role models, I suppose is what I'm saying, because for me, I'm like, well, she's my niece, she should be able to look at me and go, well, you work in theatre, and I work, so therefore I could work in theatre, we're from a similar background, but she didn't, and I think it's much more about the culture shift that needs to, I think it's about the culture in organisations and the way that buildings feel. I think it is about representation. Representation absolutely matters, but I think it's I don't think it just stops there. I think it's about the environment that is created and everything that comes with that. And I think there's also, and again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about that set of assumptions about how people assume. I always think about how theatre becomes very jargonised very quickly. Do you know what I mean? And how you think that you don't speak in jargon, and then suddenly somebody's like, "Oh, what's a dramaturg? Like, what's that?" So I think there's something about kind of an awareness when you are in a position of particularly when you're in a position of power or influence, or in a leadership position, even to kind of to take all that into consideration. I think there are things, I mean, being done in individual ways, but I think it's interesting to say about kind of in terms of stepping into a building or into an environment and what that feels like.
I think it's about, isn't it, in those terms, it's about kind of the nature of the welcome and about whether or not you actually go, you look around and you go, oh, do I belong here in some way?
And there's a thing that's interesting, there was an interesting experiment so Crowley, who is a friend of mine, when she was at Doncaster, she did this experiment which was about looking at, so she was talking a lot about how instead of saying box office, they write tickets. Because you go into a building, and they did an experiment with some people from the city who'd never been to theatre, from the town, sorry, had never been to theatre, and they said, if you came in here, where would you get your ticket? Where would you expect to get your ticket from? And they had looked at the box office and went, yeah, it'd be over there, wouldn't it? But there was that little bit of hesitancy that was like, I'm pretty sure it'd be over there, I'm pretty confident it'd be over there, but it's not completely obvious to me, actually. And as soon as they change, and then they changed it to tickets, so you go, where do you get tickets from? Well, that says tickets, I get it from there. And it's those things that I think can alienate people from feeling like a sense of belonging in a building, of just those small things that we can take for granted as buildings, of going, oh, actually, yeah, saying they're a box office it's not immediately obvious what you go there for, actually, to everybody, and we shouldn't assume it is.
Sorry. Oh no, I was going to say that I was in a talk the other day with somebody from the Premier League, and they talked about the importance of changing networks. And actually, we need to ensure that we open up networks to a range and diversity of people, because actually, it goes back to grassroots, actually. If you change who the networks are, you change who your group within those networks and who your peer group is, then automatically things change, because it feels a bit wrong, because actually it's almost like it's closing doors again. But actually, if you change the fabric of who is in a network, then you change as that network grows and moves into a position of power, naturally what the decision making is. And that's reinforcing a structure that already exists, but you have to go from the bottom. You have to go from the network stage as well as from the commissioning stage and the opening the door and the entrance stage. And I think I've never heard anyone in the arts say that. It's something I've banged on about loads, about how you give access and opportunity for people to participate in something, usually without resource or without support. But I think it's a really important thing to actually look at networks and who is involved in networks, and making sure that we are opening doors and extending opportunities to begin to grow different peer networks that then make change, because familiarity comes into place.
I think that's really true, because I think that one of the things that theatre has done a lot is that it's made what it perceives as being visible change, And the visible change is that actually it is quite easy to put diversity on your stage. It doesn't actually cost you, very much. I don't mean financially, I mean in every other way, in the same way that actually it's quite easy in some ways to, it's not for exactly the reasons Sarah says, that the same people keep on being asked and have the burden of appearing on panels, but is that it's quite easy to set up a diverse panel to some degree. But what it is much harder to do is absolutely, change those networks and who you see as your peers, and also change your organisation. Tarek, do you want to comment on this?
I guess I feel quite strongly about it, and I think everyone just needs to cut the crap and get on with it, I think. And I think that's a collective responsibility. I think obviously people who control a lot of resources have an extra responsibility. I think we talk a lot about this stuff, and actually it's actually a lot more straightforward than we make it out to be. We should just do it. And the key thing that needs to change is all the people working in these organizations, all the people accessing resources, just need to be much more representative of the population as a whole, and not a subset of a subset of a subset, which means that you create hostile environments. And you have to start right from the top. So we are currently working to try to make sure our board is representative of London in terms of ethnicity, disability, other criteria, but also to recognize that it's visible representation, but also invisible representation, as you say, Lynn. And we just kind of ignore really important things like invisible disability, like socioeconomic representation, and say that that's different from inclusiveness. So you have to start with the people working and making those decisions, but then you have to, I think we've come to the point now where we just have to get on with it and be bold. So we are trialing at BAC being a relaxed venue, which means every performance is relaxed, which means everyone can tick or make noise if they need to, everyone can come in and out if it's necessary, and that causes challenges. You know, we still get letters, people saying, you know, I didn't enjoy the performance because of like X, Y, Z, or an artist saying, I don't think I can work in that environment. But at some point, the sector just have to go, but this is non-negotiable. You know, like everyone has to be included, and you have to give me a good reason to exclude people, not the other way around. And so I guess let's stop talking about it and do it, because we've got all the tools to make it happen. There are all these people out there willing to step up. And it's people like me who probably just need to get out of the way to enable that to happen.
And I think it's also true about access performances, right? Because I was having a conversation the other week with a writer, and we were talking about access performances typically being, like in the West End anyway, if at all, on a Wednesday matinee, like one caption performance on a Wednesday matinee, and then they go, well, no one really came or used it. It's like the evidence isn't there that it's really. It's like, well, who's free on a Wednesday matinee? So very small minority of people anyway. And so I think there's all that. I think you're right. You just need to go. Well, that's not going to change the approach, and just get on and do it, and don't kind of,
Our performances have got a lot better since we're less uptight. The whole atmosphere in the audience is just so much alive, which is what performance always should be.
It should be, yeah.
We've got about 8 minutes. You've had your hand up over here for a while, yeah? I think we should wait for the right mic.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm from the Lowry in Salford. I was just wondering, in relation to the point the lady made in the white shirt over there about governance structures and democratic governance structures. So a lot of organisations now have youth boards, hopefully. Not always. But how many buildings have community members represented? Well done, Sarah. But how many actually across the country? And is there anything the Arts Council could do to lobby for that to be essential rather than at the choice of the venue? How can we ensure that local artists and local communities are in the fabric of the governance structure of a building, either sitting on the board or having a sister board that influences the decision making and that makes the chief executive and the artistic director accountable to that board?
I totally don't agree with sister boards or even youth boards. Put them on the board. Like, I just like put young people on the board. And we're currently in the process of developing our board, and our board is really complex because we're part of the university. It's really complex, but I've got a brilliant chair, Kath Mitchell, and she's helping us do all that, but also then thinking below that. So Lauren, who's our programmer, has community people helping her program as well. I think, I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it is in the next Arts Council strategy, right? That we've got to, that organisations have to.
It's definitely encouraged. I just wonder how much further we could go to make it non-negotiable, as using Tarek's words.
I mean, again,
find out the next funding round.
Yeah, I mean, at Battersea,
we are working on it. Like, I think not enough do it. I think Derby, a great example, Contact in Manchester, there are loads of, and Larry, loads of great, Roundhouse, there are lots of organisations who I think are leading the way. I think absolutely, as we were saying earlier, I should be accountable to them, not to a random bunch of rich people kind of in a room.
But it's taken us 6 years, so we're only just now getting a representative board. It's taken me 6 years. Yeah, we've always had young people on the board because the university understood that, but it's only now after 6 years that we're able to, in September, we'll launch our...
Do you know, everyone says a training need, and I think that's relevant in the sense that the charity, most organisations, charities and those come with legal responsibilities that are serious and people need to be educated on, but a board operates the way a board should want to operate. And our issue with getting young people in is we imagine how a board should work, which is based around the set. I know you're agreeing, and so... That 100% agree with.
I also think there's a training need, or it's a slight controversial. Our funders and stakeholders need to really genuinely examine how they look at boards, because if you are a small company, very often funders will look at your board and go, thing is though, can they really take you on the journey you need to go on? So they are immediately contradicting the notion of having youth boards, community boards, etc., by saying these people are wrong. And I think we need to face that, and I think that the training need perhaps is about actually a really important discussion about how everybody should be empowered to be a participant at a governance level for any organisation.
Okay, we've got now lots of, and we really, as is always the case, we're going to run out of time, but I think lots of people will be around afterwards. So let's ask a question here. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if it's a question, but more of just a comment about some of the structural barriers that I think are in place for some independent artists and organisations. My name's Nancy Hurst. I run an Icon Theatre. We are an independent theatre company based in Chatham, and we make work sort of with and for communities of Medway and the South East. We do have a hugely diverse group of people that we work with, and we get funding. Sorry, this is slightly diffuse, but we get money from sort of lots of different trusts and foundations. But the thing that we find we struggle with is the sort of in-between money. And when I talk to other independent organisations and independent artists, it's also that time of stuff between, there's great work going on at a grassroots level, but actually getting the funding for things like organisational development. And I was speaking to a sort of independent artist recently, and they were saying, the Independent Artist Fund from the Arts Council is the most oversubscribed fund that there is. And I think, we do get project grants. We've just sort of got one out for a show called Chatham Witch, which is taking place in September. And we put a call out yesterday for people to take part. And we were inundated. And I had one of those moments where you suddenly think, actually, the work that we do is important to people. This is wonderful. But at the same time, I'm thinking about cash flow for, January and December. And we're lucky because we've been around for 15, 17 years. But there's a lot of other organisations who are doing that really grassroots work that need that help through that sort of in-between phase money. And I think there is, and I have fed into the Arts Council strategy about this, but I think there is a gap at the moment outside of MPO for sort of development work and in continuing that engagement relationship work, because the projects are great, but what happens after the projects and in between the projects, and that is as key to getting artists from different backgrounds on stage.
Okay, can we just move behind you? There was, yeah?
Hi, I'm S.J. Watkinson. I'm an independent producer based in Birmingham, but from the East Midlands. And it was kind of bringing together a few things that various people have said around here. And some of it was about, I think we forget, once we've been in this business a few years, that we forget where we've come from. I grew up on a council estate in Ilkeston, just down the road. And now people think, like Charlotte, that I'm posh, included in my own family. The welcome I got at my dad's house last night was unbelievable. But I just think we need to remember that, and that there's lots of people saying all these very encouraging things about opening up venues and accessibility and building networks. But we're forgetting that actually that's really difficult to do if you're not from that world. The wine in the rep is like £5.50 a glass. There's lovely craft beer. I love a nice craft beer, but it's £5 a pint. My dad can get it loads cheaper in the Working Men's Club down the road from him. He's not going to come here. He's not going to feel welcome. People still ask me, what do I need to wear when I try and get them to come to the show, and ticket prices. Try and get them to see shows that I've done. The networks that we assume that we can just tap into. I've got the senior relationship manager from West Midlands Arts phone number on my mobile on my phone, but you can't. I'm sorry, Charlotte, but you cannot access feedback from individual Arts Council people. You get the grants.management at bloody honk. They won't discuss individual applications. So people like this gentleman will never get more than one sentence feedback, which is very, very general, from their application. And also there is that coded language that, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name already. Yeah, hello, Sheila. That she mentioned. I sometimes offer to read people's applications and turn them into Arts Council speak for them. Hate myself for doing it, but I know it means that they'll get the money. Yeah. I'm really pleased to hear from Tarek that his audiences are getting better and these shows are getting more fun now that BAC is having that more welcoming attitude. But it was just, it is a question, but it's with a lot of that, bringing together a lot of these things and a lot of stuff that people say over and over. We've just got to remember where we've come from.
Great. Okay, very quickly, because we really have got to wind up. Yeah. otherwise you won't get lunch. And we can carry on the conversation.
I'll be very quick. My name's Kevin Fegan, I'm a playwright. I've been a playwright for over 30 years, and I'd like to say something positive on behalf of freelance artists, because it is possible to do it. I found two things, is that you have to be incredibly versatile in your practice. So as a playwright, you have to be able to write right across the world of theatre, from site-specific 40-foot wobbly puppets to a one-person show. The other is, the other has completely gone. Yeah. Anyway, I'd just like to say it is possible. I crawled out of Shirebrook, which is a pit village in northeast Derbyshire, you know, and here I am still 30 odd years later, and I've made a living from it for all that time. So in theatre.
On that note, I think, we're going to end. Yes. Thank you very much indeed.
The one thing I wanted to say is that you accumulate a lot of experience, and I'm willing to share that experience, more than willing, as most of my peers are, but we don't get asked very often to share that experience.
Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to take this opportunity whilst we're all together, because the festival happens in such quick succession that we never see each other. Just to say a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to the staff at Derby Theatre who have just performed beautifully. And please do explore the theatre. They have spent hours and hours and hours, and volunteers, our cabin crew members who are the heart and soul of the festival, they have spent hours decorating the theatre for your pleasure. So please do explore the theatre. There's take a picture, #Departure2019. We'll stick it up and be part of it. And thank you to the panellists for their insight, and thank you to you for your insights as well. I always learn something at Departure Lounge. I always come away, it informs how we shape and make things. And I just invite you to carry on doing that. Carry on talking to us, carry on doing that consultation in good company. Is for artists, and our policies and the way that we work and the things like that are informed by artists and in consultation with artists. So I invite you very publicly now to, not right now, but in a minute. I also want to thank the interpreters, Laura and Laura. They'll be with us throughout the festival. You can see them again tomorrow as well, so please do come back and see them tomorrow. I just want to point out as well, there's a couple of things that have still got tickets, would you believe it? And we're not completely sold out, although we nearly are. So, too many things to hold. So Represent is our queer artist showcase. We do Represent every year, and we always try and showcase artists that are currently underrepresented on our stages. And this year, it's a queer artist showcase, and we have 3 fantastic Midlands artists performing brand new scratch work. That's in the studio, and that still has tickets, so please come and see that. And then we have the rather marvellous Caroline Horton performing All of Me right here on this stage later. And I believe there are just a few tickets left. So do grab them and come and join us. And I'll see you around for the rest of the festival. See you tomorrow. Please pop upstairs. There's some grub. We're going to have some food. And we're going to carry on the conversation upstairs. So thank you very much.